What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we are going to continue our Emacs Essentials series by learning how to do efficient text selection with Emacs key bindings. So in the last video, we learned the key bindings that you can use to move around Emacs text buffers efficiently. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can efficiently mark and select text while editing. This is a pretty common thing that you'll want to do whenever you're editing text, because you need to select sections of text for copying and pasting, or maybe you want to run some command that manipulates the text that you've selected in a particular region. So it's good to know how to do text selection using the keyboard, using key binding, so that you can do that very efficiently. And we're also going to learn about a cool feature called the mark ring, which makes it really easy to jump back to places that you've been in buffers that you have open. So this is something that you probably don't know about, so I'm going to teach you about that a little bit later. All right, so to understand selections in Emacs, you first need to understand the concept of the mark. So like the point, the mark is a location in the buffer, but it's a location that was that is used as a starting point for certain text selection and editing operations. So the point is where the cursor is, and the mark is another location in the buffer that gets used between the mark and the point for to determine a range of text. So the primary way to activate the mark at the location of the point is to press the Control Space key binding, which calls the set mark command. There's also an alternate binding of command and the @ character. I don't know exactly what the real name of that character is, but it's the @ as you normally would use in an email address. That's a little bit harder to press because you have to press Control, Shift, and then the number 2. But it is useful if you've replaced the default Control Space key binding like I have. For me, Control Space is a leader key that gets into a set of key bindings that I've customized myself. So if I wanted to use the same set mark command, I would have to use the Control @ key binding instead. So let me just give a little demonstration of this quickly. I'm going to jump over to a vanilla Emacs configuration. It's very basic, as the one we've been using in the videos in this series so far. And all I need to do is just move my cursor to a particular location. So I'll put it maybe right here on the word your, and then I'll press Control Space, and you can see down in the echo area, it tells me the mark is set. So that's just how you set a mark. I'm going to tell you how to work with the mark after you do that. So now that you've set a mark, the next thing you need to know is how to create a region. And in Emacs, selections of text are called regions. A region is the range of text in a buffer between the active mark and the point. So wherever the cursor is and wherever you place the mark is what they consider the region. And there's a few different ways that you can create a region. First of all, you can set an active mark at whatever location the point is at, and then you can move the cursor using the normal movement commands that we learned about in the last episode, and that will start to build that region interactively. So I already set a mark here in this buffer. If I start pressing Control F to go forward by one letter, you'll see that there is a selection that is getting created here. And if I start using Alt F to go forward by word, it will start getting expanded by word. If I do Control N to go to the next line, it will expand that selection by the line. So you can expand and contract this selection based on the movements that you're doing. In fact, if you want to go before the place where you set the mark, you can even go use the previous line key to move before that. So you have full control over where the selection is being created by using the normal movement keys. So one thing to note here is that you can press Control G to cancel this. So like maybe you say you've got this selection started and you want to clear it really quickly, you can just press Control G and it will clear that selection. So another way to create a region is to hold Shift while pressing any movement key binding. This is another approach in Emacs that is more reminiscent of what you would do in a typical text editor, where you would hold Shift and then press any of the arrow keys or maybe the page up, page down keys. You can do a similar thing in Emacs. So if I were to go to the word this here and press Shift while I'm holding Control N, that will select the whole line. So effectively what this is doing is it's setting the mark at the beginning of this line, and then it is moving the point down one line. So it automatically sets the mark for you before you make that movement. So that could be a much easier way to do selections in a way that's more comfortable, because all you have to do is just hold shift while you're doing movement keys, and then it will create the region automatically. It will set the mark, and then the region will get created as you move. Now, either of these approaches is totally fine. Sometimes I think it's better to use the set mark command first, hit Control Space, and then do any arbitrary movement, because it will give you more flexibility on how you create your region, basically. When you're using the Shift key to create selections, I think that you're constrained by which key bindings actually allow you to use Shift with them. Some of them don't, I think. So like if I were to do Shift Alt right square brace, or I guess you could say right curly brace, it won't do the shift selection because you're already using shift to get to that curly brace character. So it's better if you hit Control Space and then use the alt right curly brace so that you can get the whole paragraph while you're doing the selection. So if you want a more generalized approach that works in more cases, use Control Space and then use movement keys to create a region. Otherwise, you can just use shift with the normal movement keys and then create a region that way. And it may be that you use both of those approaches at different times depending on what you're doing at the moment. It's up to you and your personal tastes. So if you have a deactivated mark, and we'll explain more about what that means later, you can press Control X to run the exchange point and mark command whenever the point is anywhere in the buffer. And what that does is it creates a region between where the point currently is and the previous mark that was deactivated. That can be useful if you set a mark because you want to get back to a place later, and then you move around in the buffer and you're like, oh, okay, I want to make a selection now using the previous mark. You just press Control X, and it will create that selection for you. So for example, if I move the cursor to this line here, how to use this configuration, and I use Control Space to set the mark, I can hit Control G to cancel that, but then I can move down, let's say to right below this paragraph, and hit Control X, and what that does is it places a new mark, it creates a new mark where the point was, and then it jumps back to the previous mark and creates a region for that whole selection between those two locations. So that's another way that you can create a region maybe whenever you weren't thinking you would need a region, but then at the last minute you're like, oh, I actually want to make a selection between these two locations. So it can be another way to create a region if you like to do it that way. So let's see, what else? Also, you can use your mouse to create a region. I think that this automatically creates a mark. So if I were to select this whole text here, if I click into this buffer and then just start dragging my mouse, it will create a region, basically. It will create a mark at the first point where you click the mouse, and then it will move the point to anywhere you drag the mouse to. So now you've created a region just using mouse click and drag. I think this also works in the terminal if your terminal supports, or your terminal emulator supports mouse events. So you should be able to do this in terminal Emacs as well if you are using that. However, I personally don't like using the mouse as much as possible just because the keyboard is a lot faster in most cases. There's also specialized marking commands that we'll talk about in a bit that allow you to create regions using text objects. But we'll cover that a little bit later because there's other things to talk about first. So I think I covered that already, that the shift selection approach is basically the same thing as creating a mark and moving the cursor. It's just a matter of whether you like one or the other. So once you have a region of text selected in a buffer, there are certain commands that you can use on that region to do certain types of text operations. So for instance, we talked about copy and paste in Emacs in the Absolute Beginner's Guide to Emacs using the Control W and the Alt W key bindings. Control W actually deletes the text and Alt W just copies the text. If you have a region of text selected, these two commands, kill region and kill ring save, will operate on that region. So if I were to go back into our example buffer here, I move up to this line, I hit Control Space, and then Alt right curly brace to get this whole paragraph. I can then hit Control W, and that will delete that whole section, but actually it's got it in the paste buffer, so I can paste it somewhere else. I believe it's is it Alt Y? No, Control Y. So that basically allowed me to paste that whole paragraph in the new location. The same thing for copying. If I were to copy this paragraph, all this text basically, and hit Alt W, then I can move down to another line here and press Control Y to paste that down there. So that copy or the kill region command and the kill ring save command allow you to operate on regions. There's other commands like upcase region and downcase region, which basically allow you to change the the casing of the text in a particular region. So if I were to select this whole sentence, if I hit Control Space and then Alt F, or let's go all the way here. I forgot the key binding for sentence apparently. If I run the command upcase region, then it will make one thing Emacs will do is ask you the first time if you want to do this. I'm just going to use exclamation point to try it. And then you can see the selection of text that I made before. It changed all those characters to be uppercase. So it's something you can do if you happen to want to do that. I don't really find very many cases where I need to use these commands, but it's just an example of another region command that you can use on a text selection. If you're evaluating or if you're writing Emacs Lisp code, you can also use the eval region command, where if you select a certain number of S expressions in your Emacs Lisp file, you can evaluate those all at once. So that's another thing. And basically, if you go looking in the list of commands, you can find any command that ends in -region to find other region-based commands. So if I were to use let's use Alt-X. And then I can type -region here. And since I'm using Ivy, it does do searching based on the end of that string, especially if I put the $sign there. Oh, it didn't work. Anyway. If you have a good completions engine, you can easily find commands that end with -region. And you'll see there's quite a lot of commands that are available for working with regions. So you should take a look at all these to see if there's anything in there that might be useful for you and your workflow. But that's something that you can easily get to. You can set a key binding to run any of these commands after you've created a region, and it can be pretty helpful for doing regular text editing. And as I mentioned before, if you want to deselect or clear the current region, you just press Control-G to quit it. It's the keyboard quit command, which is pretty common for pretty much anything in Emacs. If you want to get out of it, just press Control-G. All right, so now we have some specialized marking commands that you can use in addition to the things I've shown you already for marking specific text objects. A text object, as we discussed in the previous episode, is a unit of text, like let's say a word or a line or a paragraph. And these commands allow you to do selections on some of these text objects very easily. So the meta @ character key binding will do mark word. I think I could even do it in this buffer. Let's see. So I'll do shift meta @ yeah, so it selects to the end of the word. So the idea is that it sets the mark at the end of the next word without moving the point. So let's do that one more time so you can see what actually happened here. I'm going to press Alt @ and you can see now that it created a region here, but it actually left the point at the beginning of the word, which is different than if you were to press Control Space and use Alt F. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's do Shift or Control @ to create the mark. In my key bindings, I have to do something different. And then Alt F to go forward. So now if I use the normal way of doing this motion, the cursor would be placed after the word. But if you use the Alt @ or the meta @ key binding, the cursor will stay at the beginning of the word and then select to the end of the word. I think this is useful if you want to replace a word. So if you just do Alt @ and then type something else like where. Okay, it doesn't work for me because I'm using evil key bindings here. But the idea is that you could replace a word very easily if you did that. Control Alt @ does a whole S expression if you are in an Emacs Lisp buffer. So let's actually go to the init.el file here. And I'll jump down to this defun. I believe that's the one, right? Mark S expression. So it marks to after the end of the current S expression without moving the point. So I'm right at this line here before the message line. I'm going to press Control Alt and then press @ and then it will basically grab the entire S expression that would be inside of this range of text, which can be pretty helpful if you're doing editing of Emacs Lisp and you want to delete a certain section of it without having to go and run your cursor over the whole thing yourself. So it can be pretty useful. Alt-H does mark paragraph, which marks the whole current paragraph and moves the point to the beginning of the paragraph. So if I go back to the org file here, and I can try to move up to, let's say, this line here, and I'll use Alt-H, and it's going to select what it considers to be a whole paragraph. Now, I think if you keep pressing it, it will expand that selection to go even further. So with any of these marking commands that select some text object, pressing it repeatedly will expand that selection by that same type of object, which can be pretty helpful if you want to quickly select a region of text. So if we were to go back to the Alt-at, then you could do it by word and just keep expanding forward by word. And then you can do Alt-H to go forward by paragraph. So the Control-Alt-H marks a whole defun inside of Emacs Lisp. And I know we're talking a bit about Emacs Lisp here before we've actually talked about Emacs Lisp in general in the series, but it's just something to know for the future whenever you actually do start editing Emacs Lisp, because it's basically inevitable if you use Emacs. So if you use Control-Alt-H, then it will take the whole top level expression, or defun in this case. So if I put my cursor here around the set Q, if you do Control-Alt-H, okay, it didn't work. Oh, sorry, I didn't do Control there. Control-Alt-H, you'll see it does the whole expression. So if you have like a whole set Q, if you're setting a variable in Emacs Lisp, or maybe you're defining a function, this can be very useful for selecting the entire thing. For example, if you wanted to cut it and paste it somewhere else, or maybe you just wanted to delete the whole thing, it is possible to do that. Also, there is Control-X, Control-P, which marks the entire page by setting the point at the beginning of the visible part of the buffer and then the mark at the end. And I'm realizing now how many typos I have in this section, so I apologize for that. That's Control-X, Control-P. So if I press that, Control-X, Control-P, the entire visible part of the screen is now going to be marked. Now, it doesn't go further than that. If I were to press Control-W to delete this, well, does it do the whole? It can't be the whole file. Let's see. So apparently it's doing more than what I expected. Maybe the concept of a page doesn't exist in Emacs Lisp buffer. So let's go over to the org buffer and see how long this file is. Okay, so there should be some text I can do here. Control-X, Control-P, Control-W. Okay, so it seems to be getting the whole file. I don't know exactly why it takes the whole thing unless it needs to have some explicit delimiter for pages. We may have talked about that in the previous episode. I don't remember, excuse me if we haven't, but you basically have to have what's considered a page. So apparently in this case, it's taking the entire buffer. There is a separate command for that, which is Control-XH, which does get the whole buffer every time. So if I were to use Control-XH in this buffer, it will select the whole thing. If I use page down, I can see that it did select it all. Control-XH and then Control-W to delete it. So if you wanted to do an operation on your entire buffer, then that's one way to do it. You can use Control-XH to use the mark whole buffer command. Okay, so now let's talk about a very interesting feature called the mark ring. So far we've been using marks to create regions, to create selections in a buffer. But another very useful thing you can do with marks is to use it to remember your current place so that you can navigate somewhere else in the buffer and then jump back to where you were before using the mark ring. So this is where the concept of active versus deactivated marks comes into play. So when you have an active mark, any movement key that you use after that will be used to create a region. However, if you do something to deactivate that mark, then it will be added to the mark ring. And that basically is a history list of all the most recent marks in the current buffer. So there's a few ways that the mark will become deactivated. First of all is typing text into the buffer. So if you set the mark and then you start typing, it will immediately deactivate whatever the mark location is that you set most recently. Now also, if you run an editing command, like let's say kill region or anything like that, it also will deactivate the current mark. So usually you set a mark to do some kind of command, and then after the command is completed, either typing or running a command, then that mark will be deactivated. So you can also press Control-G to deactivate the mark, just like we were talking about before. If you press Control-Space and then you want to cancel the mark that you've created or the region you created, press Control-G. So that also deactivates the mark. But you can also, if you know that what you want to do is save your current location as a mark, you can just press Control-Space, Control-Space. So let me jump down to this line, how to use this configuration. If I press Control-Space, you'll see it says mark set. If I press Control-Space again, it says mark deactivated. So if you just want to store your location, press Control-Space, Control-Space, and that will create a deactivated mark in the mark ring. Now, once you have put things in the mark ring, you can now jump to the location of those previous marks in the current buffer using Control-U and then Control-Space. So I've set that mark right here at the beginning of this line. If let's say I jump down to this line here, if I press Control-U and then Control-H, I'm sorry, Control-U then Control-Space, Control-U, Control-Space, it jumps back to that original line where I was before. Now, when you use Control-U, it runs a command called universal argument, which is basically a way to modify the next thing that you press afterwards. So in this case, we're pressing Control U to send a prefix argument to the set mark command, and that changes the behavior of set mark command to, instead of creating a new mark, it pops the last mark off of the mark ring and makes it the active mark and moves your point to that position. So let me verify what I just said here. So I'm going to start moving the cursor, so it's not active right now. And if I press Control U, Control Space, okay, it jumps down to the end of the file. That makes sense. So let's start over again. We'll create a new mark here. Control Space, Control Space. I'm going to move forward in the file. I'll press Control U, Control Space, and it jumps back to this location. Then I will move the cursor. So what I said before was slightly incorrect. Whenever you pop a mark, a deactivated mark off of the mark ring and jump the point to it, it does not activate a mark at that location. It just moves you to that location. So this is a way to move to prior locations that you had marked something in the current file. And like I said before, this is very useful if, let's say, you're looking at a long text file or a file containing code, and you want to remember where you currently are because you want to jump back there later. You can just press Control Space to set a deactivated mark at the current location, go wherever you want to go, and then press Control U, Control Space to jump right back to where you were before. That can be very helpful for getting around quickly. So now, why is it called the mark ring? Was because this history list that you're creating of your deactivated marks will wrap back around to the beginning as you pop the current mark. So if I were to start popping the mark here, Control U, Control Space repeatedly, watch what happens. Control U, Control Space, Control U, Control Space, Control U, Control Space, Control U, Control Space, Control U, Control Space. Eventually, I'm going to get back up to that line we were at before, how to use the configuration. So it will get there in just a second because there's actually 16 locations in this mark ring. So now I think we finally got back to the beginning. So the reason why it's called a ring is because there is a fixed number of items that this list stores. And when you start going backwards between the marks that you have, when you get to the very last one, it's going to go back to the top again and start going down. So it will cycle through all of the positions that you have in case for whatever reason you wanted to keep looking at previous things and then get back to where you were originally. Now, you can change the size of the mark ring. So maybe you don't want it to be 16 because it's too many, or maybe you want more locations to be stored in history. You can set this variable mark ring max to be larger or smaller than 16 to tune it to whatever you want it to be. In the next episode, we'll talk about how to customize variables like this, so don't worry about that right now, but just keep in mind that you can customize this behavior if you do want to have more or less items in your mark ring. There's also a global mark ring, which is a separate one from the buffer local one. Each buffer has its own mark ring, and then there's one that's global that works across all the buffers that you've visited. So each time you deactivate a mark in a particular buffer, it's added to both the current buffer's mark ring and the global mark ring. And that also enables you to jump back to files that you've previously visited. So there's a separate key binding for doing this. That's Control X, Control Space, which runs the pop global mark command. And when you do that, it will cycle through the most recent deactivated marks no matter where they happen. So if you did it the same, like 2 deactivated marks in the current file, it will go back between those. But if you did a deactivated mark in another file before that, it will jump back to that other buffer, to that location where you did a mark. So let's jump to the init.el file. I'm going to create a couple marks here. So I'll create a marker at this defun for display startup time, Control Space, Control Space. I'll jump forward to this require use package, Control Space, Control Space. Then I'll jump a little bit further down into the buffer. So now what I'm going to do is press, well, actually, let's change to the readme.org file. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to press Control X, Control Space. It's going to jump back to that previous location we were just inside of the init.el file. And then Control X, Control Space, it will jump to how to use this configuration, which is interesting because it should have been in the previous file, but let's check that out. Control X, Control Space, jumps back to the previous file. So it seems to be going back between the two of those, which is not what I would expect at the moment. But let's try this one more time. So I'll set a couple marks here, set a mark at this global display line numbers mode, set a mark here as well. And then I'm going to use Control X, Control Space. It will go back to global display line numbers mode, Control X, Control Space. Now it jumps back to how to use this configuration. So my understanding is that it's supposed to go back to the most recent marks that you created. but it seems to be jumping to something else. So whenever I tested this before, it did something different. Mea culpa. I don't know maybe what's going on with the configuration on this machine compared to the machine that I use for testing, but keep in mind that it may not act exactly as you expect it to act. And if someone knows what the sort of mechanics are for this, certainly leave a note in the comments so that other people can see it. But the idea is that you should be able to use this to jump between files that you've had open that you've created marks in. So it can be a very useful thing for whenever you are doing an investigation into a code base and you're jumping around between multiple files and you want to get back to that place that you were at before because you don't remember which file or which line it was. You can use this feature for that purpose. Lastly, I want to say that you can use the global mark ring max variable to control the size of the global mark ring. In general, it's supposed to be the same. It's supposed to be 16 by default, which it does seem to be here, but it doesn't work exactly like I expected it to, obviously. So I'm not sure what the deal is there, but you can also customize that if you want the global mark ring size to be different than the local buffer mark ring size. All right, so that is all we wanted to talk about today for mark and region. Hopefully that was useful for you. Definitely leave a note in the comments if you have any questions or ideas about that. But now that we've learned enough essentials for day-to-day editing tasks in this series, the next thing that we're going to talk about that you've probably been wondering about is how we can customize Emacs to set things like the theme, the font, and even the indentation width for particular programming languages that you use. Just general day-to-day configuration of Emacs. So in the next episode, I'm going to walk you through how you can use Emacs customization interface to set everything up the way that you like it. And this will be the basis for going forward, how we talk about how you would configure Emacs. So we did mention this customization UI in, I think, the Absolute Beginner's Guide video, but we're going to go into more detail about that and how you can use it for customizing Emacs. So if you have any specific areas that you would like to learn more about in Emacs, like maybe you're just getting started with Emacs and you have a certain thing that you're trying to do in Emacs that you used to do in maybe another editor, definitely leave a comment and let me know about that so that I know what kind of things to prioritize going forward. Because basically the strategy I'm using here is to think about what I would need to know as a new user of an editor based on other editors I've used in the past and what types of things I would be looking for. So it's good to hear from other people as well to see what kinds of things that you would be interested in seeing so that I can make good videos about those in this series going forward. So before I go, I would love to thank my sponsors, and I apologize to any new sponsors who aren't on the screen yet because I haven't updated it in a little while. But these people have decided to sponsor the work that I'm doing on making videos about GNU Emacs, GNU Geeks, etc. And I'm very thankful to them for their support. It definitely keeps me going whenever it's difficult to make a new video in a particular week. I just think about my sponsors and the fact that they have enjoy what I'm doing so much to put this level of support into what I'm doing. It really makes me motivated to keep going. So if you are interested in becoming a sponsor of the channel, take a look at the links in the description. I'm on both GitHub sponsors and Patreon. There's also a link to PayPal for one-time tips. With that said, thanks so much for watching this video. Like I said, leave any questions you have in the comments. Also, check the link in the description below to join our Discord if you want to talk more about Emacs with other like-minded people. A lot of nice people there. And if all else, just share this video with other people you know who might be interested in Emacs, and also leave a like so that people can find it easily. So thanks a lot for watching, and until next time, happy hacking. See ya.